Welcome to Mac and PC Prime video. Today I am show you how to install macOS Monterey on unsupported models. macOS Monterey. Apple decided to remove official support for some of the older Mac hardware. In general, anything older than a 2015 model is no longer supported. This doesn't necessarily mean that those Mac models cannot handle the new operation system. In most cases it would run it just fine. Luckily, if you want to, there are always ways to get around these restrictions. In this video, I will describe step by step how to install macOS Monterey on officially unsupported models by using OpenCore Legacy Patcher. Introduction. In an earlier post, I described how to install the predecessor of Monterey, Big Sur, on unsupported models. I used Micro Patcher for that video and mentioned Big Mac there as well. For this video, I will go for a different method and I will use OpenCore Legacy Patcher to get around the hardware checks. In contrast to Micro Patcher, this method uses an unmodified macOS installer. Instead, it tricks the installer in thinking it is running on a newer, supported, model. Overview of the process. For the video, I will be using a late 2013 iMac with model identifier iMac 14-2. My model has the highest spec CPU, an i5 4771, a 256GB SSD, 16GB RAM and the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 775M with 2GB. This is interesting as support for NVIDIA GPUs has been mainly removed in Monterey. It was running macOS Catalina as a starting point, which is the last officially supported release on this model. The steps we need to go through are the following. These need to be executed on the device where you would like to install Monterey. 1. Download the Install macOS Monterey app without using the App Store. 2. Create a bootable USB drive for macOS Monterey. 3. Build and install OpenCore on the USB drive. 4. Boot from the USB drive and install macOS Monterey. 5. Install OpenCore on the SSD hard drive. 6. Optionally install patchers, mainly for non-metal or non-supported GPUs like my NVIDIA card. Step 1. Download the Install macOS Monterey app without using the App Store. The first step in this whole process is to get our hands on the installer. As the device which we want to get Monterey on is officially not supported, the installer for Monterey will not be shown in the App Store on this device. So we need to find another way to get our hands on installassistant.pkg for Monterey. Mr. Macintosh keeps a list with versions and links to directly download the installassistant.pkg file. You can find this here. At the time of writing, the latest and release version was 12.6, build to 1G115, and I used the following link to download the package from Apple. Once you have downloaded the .pkg, you can double-click on it and run through the dialogues to install macOS Monterey to your applications folder. Running this just like on an unsupported model, like mine, won't work as you will get the update cannot be installed on this computer during the installation. Step 2. Create a bootable USB drive for macOS Monterey. Now that we have the installer downloaded and ready, we will use it in this step to create a bootable Monterey installation USB. First, we need to prepare the USB drive to make sure we can boot from it and patch it with OpenCore in the next steps. To do so, insert the USB drive and open Disk Utility. In Disk Utility, click to show all devices. Then, in the left column, select your USB drive and click Erase on the top menu. Now give the drive a name. I chose 16GB USB, select macOS Extended, Journaled, and GUID partition map as scheme and click Erase. When this is done, we can use the installer to prepare the USB and get files on it. Open a terminal window and execute the following command. This can take some time, depending on the speed of your USB drive. In case you called your drive different when erasing it within Disk Utility, you will need to adapt this in the command here. At this point, we have a standard bootable USB drive for installing Monterey. This one could actually be used now to install Monterey on supported hardware. Step 3. Build and install OpenCore on the USB drive. From here we start with the steps that are needed to overcome the fact that our hardware is no longer officially supported. We will use OpenCore Legacy Patcher for that. OpenCore is a bootloader that is often used for Hackintosh builds, but it runs on real Apple hardware just fine as well. OpenCore patches or changes some data in memory, making the software think it is running on newer hardware, and by this bypasses any restriction. To start with this, we first need to download the latest version, which can be found here. As you can see, there is a graphical version, OpenCore patchergi.app.zip. After downloading OpenCore patchergi.app.zip, extract it by clicking on it in Finder and open the application. You should see a graphical version, several options. Press enter main menu and now choose option 1, build and install OpenCore, clicking finished building your OpenCore configuration. Select install to disk, install. After entering this option, select your USB drive from the list, disk 2 in my case. In the next screen, select the only EFI partition which exists on that drive. This will install the OpenCore bootloader to the EFI partition on the USB drive. Mount your EFI, enter your administrator password. OpenCore has finished installing to disk. Reboot to apply, ignore. Step 4. Boot from the USB drive and install macOS Monterey. Boot OpenCore and launch the installation. The USB drive is fully prepared in the previous 3 steps. Now it is time to boot the Mac from the USB drive in order to install Monterey. To do so, reboot your Mac and hold down the Option key during boot time. Holding down the Option key brings up the bootloader. In there, you should see the currently installed system, named macOS X in my case, an entry to install Monterey and an EFI boot entry with the OpenCore logo. The last 2 are on our USB drive. From here, the standard bootloader, we can't start the installation as we need to do this from OpenCore to hide the real system identifier. Instead, select the EFI boot entry using the arrow keys and press enter. This brings you in OpenCore, which looks very similar to the standard bootloader. The only difference is the text at the right bottom corner. From here you can now choose the Install macOS Monterey option. This will launch the installer from the USB drive, which can take some time. Once you arrived in the installer, you should see something like this. Prepare your internal SSD, HD for the installation. For the first 2, we need to launch Disk Utility first from the menu as we need to prepare our drive. In Disk Utility, first click on the button to show all devices. To go for a single OS and do a fresh install of Monterey, click your drive, internal SSD, HD, on the left side and click Erase. Give your drive a name. I chose Macintosh HD, choose APFS as format and GUID as scheme. You can change the size on the left side, name the volume, I chose Macintosh HD, and choose APFS as format. As soon as Disk Utility is ready with the operations on the drive, we are good to move to the next step. Install macOS Monterey. Now that our disk is prepared, or you decided to upgrade the existing install, you can start the installation from the menu. Click Continue, accept the license agreement and select the volume on which you want to install Monterey. Here you need to select Fresh Install, the only internal volume you see here, called Macintosh HD in my example. From here on, you can relax and sit back as the installation can take quite some time. If all goes well, you should see the following screen after a series of reboots. Navigate through the questions, which differ depending on which type of install you decided to go for. You can notice in some cases that everything is pretty slow. This is due to the lack of video card drivers or metal support, which we will fix in step 6. If all goes well, you should end up on the desktop of your newly installed macOS Monterey system. Step 5. Install OpenCore on the SSD hard drive. So far we have successfully installed Monterey on our Mac. But to start it, we still need to boot from the USB drive as that is where OpenCore is currently installed. In order to fix this, we need to install OpenCore to the internal HD SSD instead. Again, downloading OpenCore patchergi.app.zip, extract it by clicking on it in Finder and open the application. You should see a graphical version, several options. Press Enter main menu and now choose option 1, Build and install OpenCore, clicking Finished building your OpenCore configuration. Select Install to Disk, install after entering this option, select our internal drive from the list, Disk 0 SSD in my case. In the next screen, select the only EFI partition which exists on that drive. This will install the OpenCore bootloader to the EFI partition on the internal drive. Mount your EFI, enter your administrator password. OpenCore has finished installing to disk. Reboot to apply, reboot. Step 6. Optionally install patches. If the model of Mac which you are using doesn't have a metal supported card or you are having one of the NVIDIA based models where Apple decided to remove support for, you need to go through this additional step. In this step, we will install some patches in the system that will either add graphics acceleration for non-metal card or fix the driver issues for others. Relaunch the downloaded OpenCore Legacy Patcher which you downloaded in the previous step. Now choose for option 2, Post-install root patch. Then select 1, Patch system volume. Depending on which patch is needed for your system, a selection will be made and applied after confirmation. After going through this, perform a reboot and you should be done. In some cases it might be needed to boot holding the option key, then select OpenCore.